Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today we are honored to have with us D.W. Buffa, who is known as one of the best lawyer novelists around. He's here to talk about his latest book called Breach of Trust, another Joseph Antonelli novel. Now, in addition, to being yet another in this series, there's also another strange recommendation that this book got. It's Al Gore's senior publicity advisor during Bill Clinton's second term decided that there was one book every delegate to the Democratic National Convention should have, and it was this one. Is that true?
That's almost right. Morley Winograd was the senior policy advisor to Al Gore, and Morley Winograd and I wrote a book together 6 or 7 years ago that was nonfiction called Taking Control, Politics in the Information Age, a book that led to a couple of things, one of which was Winograd, who'd known Gore for some years, was asked to become his policy advisor. The book also became sort of the basis for at least some of the things that Clinton wanted to do in the second term. It also had the effect of putting me in direct contact with publisher Henry Holt that published it, and that was how I knew an editor, and that was how I knew to whom to send a manuscript of what became the first novel, The Defense. But
wow.
Morley decided that he couldn't afford to send it to every delegate, so what he did was he sent it to the people who were chairing each delegation.
Oh, that's enough. That's seeding it, as they say.
And in the cover letter, he told them the book had to do with murder, sex, and politics, their three favorite things.
Now, the other books in the series, I'm just going to read off the titles so that people know to whom we're talking. I have a list here in front of me: Star Witness, The Legacy, The Judgment, The Prosecution, The Defense. And
that's in reverse order.
Oh, okay. Well, that's the way they got them listed here.
Well, they're backwards.
Okay.
The first novel was called The Defense, and because I was desperate to convince the publisher that they really ought to let me write another one, I said, well, God, if you're going to call it The Defense, and it was their idea to call it that, I said, you're really going to need a sequel called The Prosecution. Said,
absolutely.
That's a good idea.
And then they put you on the copywriting team.
Yeah, almost. I've never actually been able to give a title to a book I wrote. They're always changing it on me.
Well, the New York Times is pleased with you. They've written that the authentic courtroom scenes leave one with the sense that Mr. Buffa has more to say about the law than the usual lawyer turned novelist. And one of the other things that you do, at least in this book, is you're very careful about the description of characters' physical appearances and their body language. And more than that, you open this book with a lovely piece of writing about walking in New York, moving toward the Plaza Hotel where the Harvard Law School graduating class of Mr. Antonelli is going to have a dinner. And you write, I tried not to look at the plaza as I walked along the sidewalk next to the park. I heard the cab drivers cursing and pounding, their horses edging their way a few inches at a time. I glanced across at the side entrance, keeping my eyes level with the street. Men in tuxedos and women in long, expensive dresses moved with the air of people who went to these sorts of things all the time. Someone would call out a name in a voice full of surprise. Someone would stop, a look of eager anticipation in their eyes, and then, shaking hands, slapping the other on the back, making a quick round of affable introductions, laughing at their own hesitation before they remembered the right names, they would step inside where the same ritual of recognition would repeat itself over and over again as all these strangers tried hard to pretend they had once been great friends. And that is a wonderful description of what goes on at a gathering like that. I really like that opening.
Thank you.
The other thing about the book is that plot-wise, it's fairly simple. There's only one murder, and that murder, well, two murders actually. The murder that Antonelli is concerned about as a lawyer took place a long time ago. A woman either fell or was pushed from a window in the Plaza Hotel, and now somehow they're going to try and make murder out of it and pin it on a fellow by the name of Jimmy Haviland.
Yeah, Jimmy Haviland was also in that law school class. What happens is Antonelli, in that description you were reading earlier, has been sort of under protest. He comes to his Harvard Law School reunion, and he comes there because his roommate at Harvard Law School was a fellow by the name of Thomas Browning, who was going on to become Vice President of the United States. And Browning had run for the Republican nomination almost 4 years before and lost it to a man named Walker, who was a very conservative Republican. And then they induced Browning to get on the ticket. But, of course, as soon as they won the election, they really want nothing more to do with them, and they're trying to force him off the ticket. And so they drag up this old murder, which really wasn't considered a murder at the time.
Oh, hold on. I got to drag up something else. Beyond its wonderful characters, and we'll meet some of them as we go along, and we'll also find out more of the plot, Breach of Trust has a context that I want to talk about, and we'll do that when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast, and our guest today, properly pronounced, is D.W. Buffa, and the title of the book is Breach of Trust, another Joseph Antonelli novel. The publisher is Putnam and Sons, they used to be called. Now I think they're just called Putnam. And you were in the middle of the plot there. Can you kind of finish that off for us?
Antonelli's invited to his Harvard Law School reunion. His former roommate at Harvard has gone on to become Vice President of the United States, and his political enemies, which include most emphatically the President of the United States, who wants him off the ticket to replace him with a more conservative Republican. They've dredged up some old rumors that had to do with the death of a young woman named Annie Malraux, who'd fallen to her death from that same hotel, the Plaza in New York, at a Christmas party when Antonelli and Browning were both in their third year of law school.
Right. It
was ruled an accident at the time. There's a claim that actually somebody shoved her out the window and that Browning had covered it up, and they can't go after Browning directly, so they go after a guy named Jimmy Haviland, who was also in that class, and who, like Browning, was at the time in love with Annie Malraux. So that sets it up, and then the story takes place. Much of the story takes place in terms of what Browning learns about. What Antonelli learns about Browning and the political infighting in Washington, and also what takes place during the trial when he defends Jimmy Haviland.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, from a lawyer's standpoint, like your main character, except for all these friendships, I think it's a case he would have turned down. You know.
Yeah, sure.
It's really a nasty, situation.
Antonelli is now situated in San Francisco. He's become, by the time this novel takes place, a nationally famous lawyer. But the case is taking place in New York. He'd have no reason probably to take it. But he's not only friends with these people. He was directly involved with some of what happened. Yeah,
he was. One of the things that I think you do in this novel, which I find absolutely fascinating, is that you develop a context which is very, very interesting. And maybe the word context isn't right. There's a kind of mesmerizing sense of place and privilege that comes across in the book. For example, there's a scene where Antonelli is having lunch or about to have lunch with Joanna, the wife of the vice president, in a little Georgetown restaurant. The teasing laughter in her voice, you write, brought me back to what she had been when I first knew her, that summer in New York, that summer when I almost fell in love with her and maybe really had. She was still quite beautiful, not as she had been before, but with that look that normally comes only with breeding and wealth, that look of youthful beauty that has faded but not disappeared. Her looks had always depended on something subtle, something you did not notice so much when she was young. It was the way she held herself, a little distant, a little aloof, the easy way she moved, but beyond everything else, it was the way she looked at you, as if she knew everything there was to know about you and liked everything she knew. I sat down at the table with the vague wish I had never left New York.
what I tried to do is to describe certain of the characters, including both Joanna, who, as you point out, goes on to be married to Thomas Browning, and Browning, both when Antonelli knew them when he was a young law student at Harvard, and then 25, 30 years later. And there are certain things that happen over time. One is the way we start to remember things that may be slightly different from the way they really were.
Yeah.
But also the way in which certain characteristics and certain mannerisms sort of continue through the years. And with Joanna, for example, who was breathtakingly beautiful when she was young, she still has something about her, and it reminds Antonelli that much of her beauty when she was young had less to do with her physical appearance, so to speak,
right,
than that sense of who she was.
Yes, that whole bearing thing, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a judge in this book whom I fell in love with, the Honorable Charles F. Scarborough.
Yeah.
He is fantastic.
Thanks. No, I wanted this time to have a really great judge. And
You did it.
And I wanted, thanks. I wanted to have a judge who had certain. Somebody asked me this question not too long ago. Did judges really have those kind of? When you were practicing, did you ever run into a judge who had those kind of peculiar mannerisms? A lot of judges have very peculiar mannerisms. Some of them become almost theatric because they sort of use it all the time. Mm-hmm. So I tried to do something like that with Scarborough. The other thing, of course, I tried to do with Scarborough is to make him something that you really only see very often in New York, which is the older, wealthy man married to a much younger woman with whom he has a young child.
Right.
And I did that, as you'll know, for a couple of reasons, including what happens to Antonelli himself.
Yeah, yeah. You know, at a certain point in Breach of Trust, Thomas Browning makes a speech that you might want one of our current candidates for president to make. And we're going to talk about that speech. We'll read a part of it. So I suggest you stay tuned because we'll be right back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
D.W. Buffa is the guest. Breach of Trust is the book. It's another Joseph Antonelli novel about which Publishers Weekly says Buffa writes with careful attention to detail and nuance. Political intrigue abounds, I'll say, and new love stirs bitter-sweet memories as the case comes to a truly surprising ending. And so now the ending is, no, we're not going to go into the ending.
No, we better not.
No. What I do want to get into, I will say that you've got to read to the very last page of this book to get the final ending. So no skimping. Get the book out, start reading, don't go to sleep. I want to share the speech that I think might work on the stump from one of our current candidates. It goes like this. This is when our friend, the vice president, has declared for the presidency.
Yeah, he's going to run against the incumbent. He's resigned the office, and he's resigned the vice presidency, and he's going to run against the incumbent president.
And he's out on the street in New York on Fifth Avenue, if I remember correctly.
Just across from the park.
Yep. And he says, "We live in perilous times. What shall we do about it?" That was how he began one part of that remarkable speech. Shall we, as some keep insisting, turn our back on the freedoms so many of us have fought for and died for? Shall we, in order to defeat those who would destroy us, become just like them? Shall we become a country in which no one is allowed to speak his or her mind because someone might disagree, because it might not be what someone in the government wants to hear? Have we become so unsure of ourselves that the only way we can defend ourselves is to lock up those with a different point of view? Shall we become the land of cowards and informants, spying on others in the dismal hope that it will prove there is no reason to spy on us? Shall we do this, turn our back on more than 200 years of sacrifice and trial, give up the promise we once made to the world to be the last best hope of freedom, and go sniveling into the night, traitors to ourselves? That sounds like current events to me.
John Kerry should get that speech.
Yeah, ship it out to him. He could use it.
I wanted to create a character who took seriously the spoken word. And there's some things that you'll recall early in the book where Browning is trying to explain some of this to Antonelli and talking about some of the people he knew that were great in political life. One of the people he mentions, by the way, is former U.S. Senator from Michigan, Phil Hart. One of the reasons that, not so much the reason I wanted to write the book, but one of the things I'd always wanted to do was to say something in there about what Phil Hart really did, because years ago, I had the great good fortune to work for him during the last 3 years of his life.
That's right.
And Hart is the one whose name is on that Senate office building that was shut down during the anthrax scare shortly after 9/11.
Oh, okay.
And but Hart, you can go through all the nonfiction books written on American politics over the last 25 years, and you'll seldom see his name mentioned, despite the fact that probably more than anybody else, he got the Voting Rights Act of 1965 through. But no, I wanted.
Is the story that you tell about Hart and possibly going on the Supreme Court, the story that you tell in the book, is that a true story?
Absolutely true.
Wow.
Absolutely true. Nobody knows it, but it's true. Johnson, the story goes, listeners should know, is that when Lyndon Johnson wanted to move Abe Fortas from Associate Justice to the Supreme Court to become Chief Justice, there was a big firestorm, and Fortas ended up having to resign from the bench. And Johnson, near the end of his term, decided he'd give the Senate some a name they couldn't turn down. And so Hart was asked, and for whatever reason, Hart said no.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
It really is.
It really is.
He was a remarkable man.
Now, can we wind up by talking about the character that I think has more twists than the plot, Thomas Browning? He is a complex ball of wax, isn't he? Well,
I wanted to create a character again that had this phenomenal mind with this great memory and this great experience, who has this capacity to always sort of be detached from things and yet somehow in control of things.
Why didn't Antonelli slap him? That's what I want to know.
Why didn't Antonelli slap him?
Yeah, once in a while he could have slapped him. Just, hey, come on,
I think he was always kind of under the. He was always to some degree. Antonelli's always to some degree in awe of Browning.
Yeah. No. To be serious, the great thing that you do get across with this character Browning is how, for whatever reasons, right reasons, wrong reasons, he is always above everyone he comes in contact with.
There was some reviewer that described it, I think, better than I could, which is that as between Browning and Antonelli, it's sort of what goes on is it's going on between somebody who was almost always brighter than anybody else, and he finally runs into somebody who's a bit more clever. And I'll leave it to those who read the book to decide which is which. All
right, it's time to talk to people about reading the book. And the book is called Breach of Trust. It's a Joseph Antonelli novel, and the author is D.W. Buffa. And this has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.